right, so that process has started. And here we go. Okay. So welcome everybody who has taken some time to join us this afternoon. We're so glad you're here. Just a few housekeeping things. One, we are recording the session today. So if you want to review anything later, share it with colleagues, all that kind of good stuff, it will be available. Everybody who is registered will automatically get an email when the recording is ready, probably tomorrow, and with a link to the recording. We've posted or pasted a link to download the slides in the chat window. If you don't see it, we'll post it again as we go along so that people who join later will also be able to see that. We will have some time for questions and answers towards the end of the session today. And so make sure to type any questions in either the Q&A or into the chat window. We will try to check both of them as when we get to that point but don't lose your thought. So just go ahead and type your question in as it occurs to you. If you registered for and requested a certificate of participation, that will happen automatically to everybody who's attending who requested one. Because of the size of the group that we have today, this is a very popular. It may take us a week to get everybody's certificate out, so take a look for it. It kind of is a holiday too. I would say if you don't see anything by the end of next week, then send us an email or whatever, but you should hopefully have it by then. All right, so joining me today is, first of all, I'm Betsy Hill, president of Brainware Learning. Many of you know me, but I probably should say that anyway. And with me today is Dr. Robin Elliott. Dr. Elliott is director of Sanford programs at Long Island University. And there she supports the training and implementation of Sanford Harmony social emotional learning program with hundreds of schools and after-school organizations. She's also an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Education at Touro College. She has over 26 years of teaching and administration experience in New York City and South Carolina. Just want you all to think about that contrast there. And was founding special education coordinator at Harbor Science and Arts Charter School in East Harlem. She is, and I've been able to get to know her a bit over the last few weeks, and her passion is in supporting the emotional intelligence of educators, families, and students with an emphasis on those in poverty and adverse childhood experiences. And when we, in a moment, you'll hear the passion in her voice because we can certainly underscore that part of it. Here's our agenda today. The inspiration for today's webinar, of course, is that the need for social and emotional learning is more urgent and more broadly recognized than ever these days. So what we're going to do today is review, share, discuss, and play. So we're definitely going to review the basics of social emotional learning, but we don't want this to become one more just overwhelming thing in an overwhelming world of things to do right now. So we're going to try to keep it real and very practical, and at some points, hopefully a little bit playful. We're going to be focusing on resilience today, and more on that in a few minutes. First, what we want to do is to check in and acknowledge that whatever is going on in our days these days, we come together at this very moment with bucket loads of emotions and feelings. So let's start by having everyone just reflect for a moment. How are you feeling right now? If you want to share in the chat window, please do that. If not, that's perfectly fine. And being aware of our own emotions is a key part of social and emotional competence, as we'll explore in more detail. Robin, why don't you join in and how are you feeling, Robin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Betsy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And I definitely understand. I see a lot of feelings in the chat, and I really appreciate you all being honest and providing those feelings and honoring those feelings. Today is a pretty good day for me. I am feeling very excited. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to work with you all for this hour. So today's a good day for me. So I'm feeling very excited today.
Good.
Thank you, Betsy.
I just heard someone who is feeling zoomed out, and I can sure identify with that.
Absolutely.
But I'm excited as well. Um, Another part of social emotional learning, of course, is our relationship with others. First, we have to understand ourselves, and then we have to relate with others. And given the number of people on this webinar, we may not feel very connected to each other. So Robin is going to help us bridge that gap.
Yes. So, like Betsy was saying, and once again, there are so many emotions right now. Yes, many of us are zoomed out. We're working from home. There's so much going on, so much uncertainty, a lot of stress. So thank you all for, once again, for putting those feelings in there. Definitely appreciate that. Um, Lots of feelings. And so one thing is very important, even though we may be physically disconnected at this time, and I love the fact that there's so many folks from all around the world on this call. This is exciting. But it's very important for us to make connections with each other and also with ourselves. So let's have a little fun. I hope this picture brings you a little joy. It makes me feel calm. Right now, if there's no social distancing, there's no state regulations and stay-at-home orders. If you could go anywhere right now, where would you be? And feel free to put it to the chat. Oh, you guys are already on there. That's awesome. Feel free to put in the chat. You guys are good. And if you don't feel comfortable, that is wonderful too. Just kind of think about that. I see Florida, Disney, back to school. Yes, on a beach, Hawaii, family, San Diego, Provincetown,
Mountains.
island, mountains, hill, country, any beach. Yes, Tiffany, I'm with you. Right where I am. That's fantastic.
Well,
Hawaii.
I told you, Robin, the other day where I would be, which is, of course, I'm in Chicago, but there are two little girls named Charlotte and Emma who live in
Aw.
Orlando, Florida, and they happen to be my granddaughters. And I am having big time withdrawal from picking them up and giving them a big hug. So there's no doubt in my mind where I would be.
Oh, that is fantastic. I see a lot of folks on here also are saying they're Orlando and Dallas and rainforest and the beach. So
Yeah.
yes, lots of great places. And then it's very important to acknowledge that and to think about. It's fun for us to think about where we could be right now. And Ireland, I see people. We have a lot of beachgoers. Yes, Annette.
So
And
that's something that is something we have in common with people that we have never met. So asking that kind of question, thinking about where it's a very logical question too right now, really gives us a starting point and some commonality with others that we can start to build on.
exactly. And that's very important for us as we have healthy relationships with others. And as we talk about resilience and social emotional competencies, that's a great lead into those commonalities and those connections is what bridges the gaps and helps us have those healthy relationships. So thank you all for putting that in the chat. I love all the engagement. I really love it. And it was great also. I'm with Michelle, said that some of you put in there wanting to go back to school and seeing your kids again. Thank you for that. That is amazing. That is why you all do such amazing work, the passion there. So that leads into making these connections. And the reason that we're here today is to talk about social emotional learning. What is SEL? And we know now we're hearing about it more than ever, and it is the buzzword. And what exactly does that mean? And so the definition, according to CASEL, which is the Collaborative of Academic and Social Emotional Learning, these are the 5 main competencies you see in these pretty rainbow colors, is understanding, managing emotions, setting and achieving positive goals, empathy, and establishing and maintaining positive relationships, and making those good choices. So these are the 5 core competencies, according to Castle, that will dictate, and this is the foundation of learning, which what we all need and our children need before we can start to address the academic piece. So these are the 5 main Castle core competencies of social emotional learning.
Robin, I love that you talked about the fact that these need to be addressed for academics, but we can also talk about this in a much, much broader context, which is that many of you who are on the webinar today are teachers, parents, counselors, clinicians, therapists, and tend to think of the importance of SEL at home and at school. But we have to remember also that these are lifelong skills that we will need wherever we go. A couple of years ago, Google decided to study what made for successful employees at the company. If you know what makes for successful employees, you can go out and find more or help develop those particular skills. Google, of course, is a leading technology company, and most people, when asked about it, would probably assume that programming skills, analytical skills, math and algorithm development, artificial intelligence, and all that kind of stuff would be high on the list. But here's what they found. The first 6 skills on the list of the most important skills to be successful at Google were not technical. And this newspaper article that reported it called, as many employers do, soft skills: communicating, having empathy and insight into others, critical thinking and problem solving. We read that list, we don't necessarily say soft skills, but we call them social and emotional skills.
Absolutely. And just like Betsy was saying, those skills that employers need, these are essential. And so as adults and as educators, as families and caregivers, it's really important for us to think about what are those skills and how can we address those. And so like I showed you earlier, this is another visual. This is the Castle competency wheel. So these are the 5 competencies that if we address in our children and our students as young as possible, we will set them up for success. Just like when Google said those were the skills they were looking for employers. So these are the competencies that are, when our children have these at a young age and we address them consistently, and even as adults, we have to be mindful of these. We will set them up for academic success and for lifelong success, to be sufficient individuals and able to sustain themselves. And so what this is, if you look at the top left there, that's self-awareness. This is the first competency that we need to identify. And you did that earlier, and you did very well when you identified how you felt today. And so identifying these emotions right now during COVID, and just like a lot of you stressed in the chat there, there's so many feelings right now. And it's wonderful that you acknowledge those, because we have to identify those feelings, identify how we feel before we can expect ourselves to manage our behaviors and those feelings, and the same thing for our children. So the self-awareness is the first competency of the collaborative academic social emotional learning. And the second there is a segue, is so after we identify those feelings, we can help manage those emotions. Same thing with our children. If they are tired, if they are stressed, if they are hungry, we can expect them to come to the classroom, and right now it may be a virtual classroom, but we can't expect them to get on a Zoom or a Microsoft team meeting and be ready to learn if they didn't sleep last night and they don't realize that they're mad, that they're upset, that something happened to them. Same thing for adults. So managing those behaviors can only come after we identify our emotions. So that is the key. And then if you look at the yellow there, making those good choices. Us as adults and helping our children identify, if I say or do this, then this might happen. If I do this, then this might happen. I know we do that every day as adults. We're trying to make those good choices, right? We're trying to put the Cheetos away and maybe choose an apple. We're trying to go for a walk instead of a Netflix series. Absolutely. I love the chats here. We have to take care of the basic needs. That's exactly right. And so identifying what those are, and then that will help us manage and regulate our behaviors based on that and making those good choices. You identify, you know what, I didn't eat today. I've got to teach 30 kids next hour. I need to take care of that. I need to make a better choice. So yes, like you said, taking care of the basic needs, making those good choices. That's social awareness you see in the green on the left. Right now, like Betsy and I mentioned, we are physically disconnected at this moment. We we want to be at our jobs, we want to be in our schools, we want to be in our work, but we may be physically disconnected. But we have to let our staff and our families and our children and students, everyone, we are all one community. We may live in different parts of the world and we're going through different things. We may talk differently. Like Betsy mentioned, I'm from South Carolina. I live in New York City. So there's a difference there, but being part of one community, one family, and one citizen of the world, no matter what our backgrounds are and those differences are, celebrating those differences. But all of these 4 parts here, according to the Castle competencies, this is under the mantra of relationship skills, which is a competency. This is something, and I think you all can agree with me, that it is a skill, learning how to communicate with one another. Like the study Betsy showed earlier, being a good listener, learning to agree to disagree, learning to work as a team. These are all part of relationship skills. And so these are the 5 Castle competencies, the social emotional competencies, that if we address as young as possible with our students, then we are setting them up for lifelong success.
So what we want to do is start with that first one. We've already addressed a little bit but the whole concept, that first step of self-awareness. And what we want to share, Robin and I, is some work that comes from the research of Dr. Mark Brackett at Yale. And he has really made SEL his life's work. He's written a couple of books. I think he has a fairly new one out, which is Permission to Feel, I think, which is very telling. And talks about surveys that he's done. And just a few years ago, a survey of 22,000 teens, 3/4 of the words they used to describe how they were feeling were negative: tired, bored, stressed. You heard a lot of tired, a lot of stressed. 2017, and he decided to survey educators, who reported that spending 70% of their workday feeling, sorry about the typo there, feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. What do you think a survey like this would look like today? Probably very similar, perhaps even exacerbated by physical distancing that our current situation requires. And spending this much time in negative emotions is going to take a toll on our physical health, our mental health, and it absolutely impacts learning. Now, these teens and educators were reporting to a survey, not to another person, asking them directly how they feel. Think about what you guys did actually a great job of providing using some different kind of vocabulary, not just I feel fine or whatever. But think about how we typically respond to someone who asks us how we are. I'm fine. Okay, I'm okay. We used a lot of sort of just general terms, and we don't always assume that somebody is truly asking that they really want to get below the surface and understand how we feel. I know that for many of us, probably, we grew up in an era where it was the sharing of emotions or the disclosing of emotions was felt to be a weakness. It was not encouraged. But what the research is saying is that it's the opposite is actually true. And that when we can become self-aware and we can express our emotions in an effective way, that it can make all the difference. And even more specifically, what the research says is that being able to identify emotions more specifically than I'm fine or I'm happy or I'm sad or whatever is actually an essential part of social and emotional competence. Why? Because when we can get very specific about our emotions, we can more correctly identify the events that cause them. Feelings are like a news report. We have emotions because they are necessary for survival. If we can't recognize what they're telling us, that is, if all negative and all positive emotions are identified by fine or not so fine, then we're not reading the news. We're not getting that important message. So this chart, called a mood meter, was developed by Mark Brackett. And you can see that there are 4 quadrants. Robin, you want to explain how this works?
Sure, sure. And just like Betsy said, it is very important to identify and name those feelings. So if you look at the 4 quadrants here, it is broken into pleasant and unpleasant feelings. So the pleasant is on the right. Those are the yellow and green feelings. So it's divided into, like she said, the 4 quadrants. The unpleasant feelings are on the left. And then Dr. Brackett even divided this further. So there's high energy feelings and low energy. So the red that you see there, that some of you shared earlier on the chat, the enraged, the frustration, the angry, being frightened, all of those, these are the high energy, unpleasant feelings. And it's okay to feel that way. And we have felt that way and we will feel that way. So it's important to name those feelings. And then the low energy, unpleasant feelings are in the blue down there. And some of you share that. And we all know that these feelings shift and change as situations occur. So you may be in that blue, that's the low energy, unpleasant feelings. And then over to the right is where ideally we would want to be. And there are times when we are, and it's okay when we're not. The yellow, the lively feelings, the motivated, the inspired, the happy. These are the low energy, pleasant feelings.
High energy.
I'm sorry, right? High energy. I'm so sorry.
Hyper,
I'm so sorry.
lively,
Hyper.
motivated.
Thank you. Hello. Sorry. Thank you. Yes. My enthusiasm got a little confusing there. So yeah, so these are the high energy. This is what we want to feel, just like somebody said earlier, you were excited, energized, all of that. This is the high energy, pleasant feelings. And then in the green, this is the low energy, pleasant feelings. So it's pleasant, but it's not quite as high energy as the yellow. So looking at the quadrants here, and then looking earlier when you named some of those feelings, you may be able to have a little more specific idea of where you are on this chart. So it's very important for us to look at this, and like Betsy shared the link with you earlier, so you have access to this. You could use at your own, you can use with your students, with your families, with whomever, but it's very important for you to take the time to identify and name and put a specific feeling to how you are, because it's by identifying these emotions that we can help identify the situations that make us feel that way. So whatever helps you feel in that, on the pleasant side, the yellow and the green, especially in the high energy yellow, we want to do more of that. If it's going to the beach, like a lot of us had in common earlier, if it's spending time with your granddaughter, like Betsy said, if it's FaceTiming, if it's finding a Netflix show, playing an instrument, playing with your child, whatever it is that makes us feel pleasant, either high or low energy, we want to do more of that. So once again, Dr. Mark Brackett's mood meter, and I highly encourage you to use this as often as you can. And it's very important. And helping our children and students acknowledge this. Some of you mentioned earlier you want to see a child's graduation. So those are feelings that you have for that. There's feelings that our children are experiencing. And it's hard for us to label those. and it's hard for our children too. So being very mindful and sharing this with your children and your students so they can do that. And I see that Cindy put something in the chat. So all this can be shared with you later, definitely, so you can have access to Dr. Mark Brackett's mood meter.
So with the help of this chart, does anybody want to update their feelings? Oh my gosh, this is a sharing group, a sharing caring group.
I love it. I love it.
Right, great. And I think that it's really what Robin talked about. When we get more precise about labeling our feelings, we can trace them back, and we can actually be more proactive about creating the situations. And we can also be mindful of the impact that moods are likely to and emotions are likely to have on decision making. So as we all know, if you're trying to make a decision when you're frightened or angry or livid or frustrated or shocked, we're probably not going to make the most balanced decision, because we're in that very high energy negative space where we're likely to overstate the threat of something over. So that's the kind of analysis and connection to causal situations that's really important. So right now I am feeling inspired. I'm actually feeling inspired, I think, right now.
Wonderful. So you're a high energy, pleasant feeling. And I noticed in the chats, we had various emotions there, and they were all over the quadrant. So thank you all for sharing that and being able to label how you feel. And for those of you who are feeling stressed and tired, and you are feeling drained and apprehensive, just knowing that by honoring that and identifying that, you can do different things in your typical day to kind of help shift those feelings and emotions. So they will shift and vary as you go on through the day. So keep on feeling hopeful that those negative feelings will transition into more of the positive. Thank you all for being so open and honest in the chat.
A lot of great insights there. So what Brackett's and others research suggests is that these are the steps to developing emotional skills, really before we ever think about managing or regulating them. Recognizing the emotions, understanding and determining the source, labeling them with that nuanced vocabulary, expressing those emotions in accordance with cultural norms and in a way that informs and invites empathy. I thought this was very interesting because it is, I think, pretty challenging to express emotions in accordance with cultural norms, because in many cases, cultural norms tell us that emotions are not particularly important. But there are ways to express them. And particularly when you're able to take that emotion that you've named, express why it is that you're probably having that emotion, and acknowledging that it will change, because our emotions do change many times over the day, allows people to be more empathic and allows them to be more open to hearing about emotions. And then finally, we get to regulate them. Of course, that's a key part of social emotion, and that next step. So when it comes to regulating emotions, I really like this model, which comes from the Wallace Foundation, and it builds on the Castle model. And the reason I like it is that it explicitly identifies cognitive regulation and connects it to both our own emotions and to our social or interpersonal skills. So it allows us to regulate our own emotions, manage ourselves, and also manage others and relationships in social and interpersonal interactions. The centerpiece, called cognitive regulation, refers to the skills that are also now called executive functions. So executive functions are the mental processes that we rely on to control or modulate our emotional responses. They also play a lot of other roles. It's not just having to do with emotional reactions to things. As we'll see, it has to do with many other things. So cognitive skills like attentional control, inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. So many of you, if you've participated in our webinars before, have seen this chart. But what I want to do is share this again because it really helps to put those skills, executive functions, in context. So right now, parents, educators, all of us are probably, SEL comes into play at this level. This is generally where schools are focused. Language arts, reading, writing, math, science, technology, engineering. But increasingly, of course, we have this social and emotional learning component. What we don't always think about is that there is this infrastructure that builds up from foundational cognitive skills that allows us to do all these things. So everything really starts down at the bottom with what we refer to as foundational cognitive skills. And these are basic ways that our brains take in information from the outside world, including visual processing, auditory processing, processing speed, a bunch of processes that happen pretty much in fractions of a second at a non-conscious level. And then the executive functions, the things that we use for that cognitive regulation in the Wallace Foundation, are right here on top of that: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. I think I have to get rid of my drawings now in order to close that. Oh, other direction. So many educators and many parents think about executive functions mostly as self-regulation. And that is a key purpose and a key component of it. However, we need to understand that the way that we direct our minds, the way that we manage the symphony of other mental, cognitive, and emotional processes that are going on is with these three core executive functions. So the first is working memory, the ability to hold information in our minds while we manipulate it. So if you think about when you're reading and taking in information, thinking about it, that process happens in working memory. When we're trying to keep track of where we are in a complex math problem with multiple steps, that is working memory. When we give our children a set of instructions, like go upstairs to your room, grab your spelling list, and don't forget your soccer shoes, and then come down, we're counting on them to have enough capacity and working memory to remember to do all those things. Inhibitory control is the ability to suppress an action or thought, so keeping from doing something we might otherwise do. This is probably what we connect most to self-regulation, but it also has other less important contexts that it operates in besides the behavioral one. So for example, when we, in the process of reading, we probably all have experienced, any of us who have taught reading or work with kids with reading, listen to our kids reading aloud. Some kids, we call it guessing. They will just blurt a word out that has nothing to do at all with the context or the story or the passage or the text that they're reading. It turns out that based on the research, that is actually more a consequence of a lack of inhibitory control than it is guessing. So that ability to suppress that word candidate that just comes out before they have even had a chance to control it. But at the same time, it can also be not blowing out, the candles on somebody else's birthday cake. Finally, cognitive flexibility, the ability to adjust our mindset when the rules of the world around us change. Boy, are we getting our cognitive flexibility challenge these days. But we also need that skill. We need cognitive flexibility in academics as well. So when we are trying to solve a problem in whether it's math or science or even in our literature class or our history class, and our first approach to it doesn't seem to work, and we have to take a step back, we have to readjust and rethink what we're doing. So it has a lot of applications and that's really the point, is that the important thing really to understand about executive functions is that it's the same mental process, regardless of whether we're talking about academics or situations that require social and emotional competence. So here are just some examples in this chart of working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. And I've really sort of referred to these as we were going through, but and we could divide this into reading and math because we use all of these skills really in everything we do. They're highly correlated with all kinds of academic performance, as well as life performance, as well as everything on the top of that chart about how far we're going to get in the world, how much money we're going to make, whether or not we're going to be healthy adults. So we can probably all come up with ways to explain a situation where these skills are needed, but we can't really explain to somebody how to hold more information in working memory. You can't really explain to someone how to get that. You can tell them when they need to do it, but not how to actually prevent themselves from doing something in a fraction of a second that we would normally do, or to have your mind envision different kinds of perspectives and experiences. But we can actually do that. We can actually train these skills and develop these skills through the right kind of cognitive training. So this is an example of the impact of cognitive training on a group of elementary school students. The students were chosen by their teachers because they were behind in reading and math. And the students took a cognitive assessment called Mindprint at the start of the program. 12 weeks later, after they had worked on Brainware Safari, cognitive training, they took the assessment again. What we're looking at is percentile rankings. And just to make it a little bit clearer, I'm going to, again, grab my little marker here. And over here on the left, these are the bars that we want to focus on. You can see that we can develop all these other skills as well. But when it comes to executive functions, these are the three tests in Mindprint that deal with that. We're looking at percentile rankings. So I want you to think about what it means for children to go from the 22nd percentile on average to the 35th percentile in attention, to go from the 30th, the 20th, 40th percentiles up right into a typically developing range for these executive functions, both from a behavioral point of view, as well as their ability to read and to do math. So when we recall and remind ourselves that these things impact everything that we do, we can really understand why they're so incredibly important. It's not just they need to be well-behaved to learn, it's that these skills are actually inherent and integral as part of the learning process. Do that.
And Betsy, we had a great question in the Q&A. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was so great. And I was trying to put it in the chat, but I think you could probably answer it even better than me. Beth had a wonderful question and said that right now with society, that, you know, there's such an understanding that crying and showing feelings is unacceptable, and being depressed or mentioning that is very difficult, you know, that we restrict students and staff. So our emotional response is naturally to suppress it. So I just wanted to bring that up to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. In many situations, we have a child in a class or at home and says, I'm feeling really depressed. Well, you'll get over it. You'll be fine. Let's get back to work. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. And it's allowing that, validating that feeling, and then encouraging that student to understand what's causing those feelings. Really developing that competence in doing that is what's going to allow them to get past it, not by just saying, well, just stop it. We have emotions. We have emotions for a reason, as we said. We have to listen to that news feed that we are constantly getting our emotional systems.
Thank you, Betsy.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we want to now shift our perspective and talk a little bit about social awareness and relationship skills. So taking it from the self to the next step of developing empathy and.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback on what the great question was, and what Beth asked and what Betsy was sharing, was that yes, it is the social norm to say, oh, it's okay, toughen up, you got this. And I know there's some specific cultures and subgroups that you're not supposed to cry, especially at certain ages and things like that. So looking at this castle again, managing those behaviors. We talked about self-awareness, identifying that. And no matter the kids are 2 years old, 4-year-old, 14, 40, 80, there's so many emotions that people have, especially right now. And going back to managing that, it is a skill. So thank you for putting that in the chat. And people say, oh, toughen up, don't cry, babies cry, you're not a baby. And someone put in there that a suggestion could be writing in a journal. But whatever we can do, I want you to look back at this, the castle competency wheel here, is whatever it is to help regulate those emotions. So teaching children, and even though it may not be the social norm, but right now what we can do is modeling that it is important to say, I honor that you are stressed. I see that you are angry. That made you mad. That hurt your feelings. It's okay if you are a 16-year-old boy and something hurts your feelings. And it's okay to cry, even though that may not be the social norm. And doing that in public, but having that may be difficult for children, adolescents. I see some middle school folks here on the chat, but writing in a journal, having them talk it out, putting it in a blog or what have you, but helping our students and ourselves and our families right now, managing whatever we can do to help regulate those negative emotions that we feel. So understanding that not only the self-awareness, but the management piece is huge for young children and even for adults. We say, as educators and as caregivers, I know a lot of you are on the line here, you take care of young children, whether they're your own children, whether you're teachers and your students, you're taking care of elderly folks, you're taking care of a lot of people. As educators, we're nurturers, generally speaking. And so you want to take care of everyone else, but it's also, we have to know that we have to take care of ourselves too. And so even you're working with adults, you're training adults with teachers, they're going to be upset. They're going to be stressed. So helping no matter where we are on this, in our emotional development as adults, as children, we have to look at all 5 of these components, because identifying those, managing those behaviors, that leads to the relationship skills there. Because there's so much, you're exactly right, there's so much trauma right now. Thank you for mentioning that. There's so much trauma in what we're going through right now, on top of what children and our students have already gone through in their life. And it's very important to acknowledge that. And so, and definitely we can have more conversations on that later, because it is such a huge topic. But no matter where we are and what our children have experienced and what we have experienced, really paying attention to those 5 social emotional competencies will help build that resilience. So thank you for all that in the chat. And being a model, thank you, Larry. Being a model for that, we can do what we can do. It's very hard with the news and the media, but controlling what we can control can.
Yeah, we'll be coming back to that concept in a little bit. I want us to get to the resilience part, but we wanted to take this one other step in between of talking about ways to start to connect and to build empathy, some easy ways that parents and teachers can use to help our kids and our students get started on that.
Absolutely. And part of that we'll talk about later, that resilience, is we need to connect with one another. Just like we did earlier, we have over 300 people all over the world on this call, and we saw the commonalities there. So these are some examples. If you're looking for some ways to address those 5 emotional competencies, if you're looking for ways to build empathy, to build those positive relationships, these are some connection cards that you can find on Sanford Harmony's website, and we're going to send that to you. But this is from Sanford Harmony, which is a free resource. Some of you
Yes,
may
I
have.
wanted to underscore that this is all free and there's some wonderful stuff there. So go check it out.
Absolutely. Free, 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 free. It was free pre-COVID, peri-COVID, post-COVID. SanfordHarmony.org. And my email will be at the end, so we can always help you and give you the resources for this. But they have conversation starters. They have various types of connection cards that you can use with your students of all grade levels, of all ages. You can use with your families at home, but they're conversation starters. Thank you. It's www.sanfordharmony.org. You have conversation starters, so they have it even broken into different grade levels. So if you have babies, pre-K, even younger than that, up until 2nd grade, here's some examples. So you can really find a way to build engagement and engage your students online or working at home. But these are great conversation starters so we can build connections with our children. And then for the older students, you have some conversation starters as well. There's collaboration cards you could have for buddies, you could have for peers. And then what you see right here, this is an example of a community builder activity. So these are activities that are already created for you. They're really fun and they're free. So one example, just like you see right here, let's help our children find out some positive things about them. I know our human nature is to go negative and to find what we can do better, but let's help our children find out, come up with an adjective to describe themselves. So you can do this at home, you can do this online, you can really share and go
You can do
around.
this asynchronously. I mean,
Absolutely.
so yeah, there are lots of ways to do this that don't make us go out where we're not supposed to go or make us sit in front of another Zoom screen again.
Exactly, exactly. So these are some cards that you could use and you can have children. Yeah, you can just have fun with it and just a way to build connections, either with a large group, a small group, or with peers. So yes, synchronously, you could use this, asynchronously, just a great way to build connections and also just to kind of look into yourself as well, building that relationship within yourself, finding out more about you. We can always.
Great also for dinner table. And it's, while
Yes.
the original cards talk about 3rd to 6th grade, I can promise, having looked at these, that these can be fun really for adults as well, older kids. And I think about this kind of thing being a great dinner table conversation.
Absolutely. And as now in a society where we're bringing back the basics and we're trying to cook more with our children and we're spending a lot of time at home and we want to have something to have meaningful conversations with our children with, besides talking about TV or Instagram and all that, we can use some of those conversation starters and a great way to work with each other and just have fun. So that was Sanford Harmony. Those are some connection cards that you could use there. And that bridges us to resilience.
Yeah. So we really want to talk about resilience now. The world has changed so much in the last few months. Still, tremendous amount of uncertainty, stress, trauma, physical separation. And it was initially most of the research on the impact of trauma and negative life events focused on the negative outcomes and the vulnerabilities and what led people to be the most damaged by these. But there was a researcher named Norman Garmezi, who was a developmental psychologist at the University of Minnesota. And his work started to shift to considering why some children thrive and become successful adults despite the adversity that they face in their lives. And so following in his footsteps, a lot of research has now been done on how we can make ourselves less vulnerable, or in other words, more resilient. So this is, we think, a good definition. It's from the American Psychological Association. Reminds us that adversity can come in a lot of different forms. It also reminds us that resilience is also learning. When we adapt to new circumstances or figure out how to overcome a situation or problem, that growth, which is often a key part of having difficult circumstances, is really about learning to do something new, learning to do something in a different way. So Robin is going to share some of the competencies, and I know I'm pushing a little bit fast here, but I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for some questions. But I want to just underscore the bouncing back is part of it, but also that learning and personal growth as part of resilience.
Absolutely. And just like Betsy was saying, how do we teach this resilience? I mean, we're being resilient right now as adults, as educators going through COVID, and we're able to regulate our emotions. But what do children have to do to become resilient adults? That emotional intelligence, those skills that we talked about, the communication, the empathy, connecting with one another, learning how to have conversations, that is key. And really giving them and teaching them how to have those social and leadership skills. And one thing, especially right now, is that anxiety and that depression. I know there were a lot of comments in the chat, and we could spend a lot of time on a lot of these. But how do we teach children how to be less anxious and depressed? And that goes within that self-awareness and the management. And the 5 castle competencies that we talked about, and working in a relationship and teaching those team skills, like Google was looking for as one of the many employers, is how do we teach children to become independently and to solve conflicts by themselves? And so by developing that confidence and those competencies, they will be able to become better at solving conflicts, because they will have that within themselves and have the confidence that they have the skills to do that. And just like she said, this definition is what is resilience, and it is defined as being able to adapt and overcome adverse situations, bouncing back from difficult experiences. And also the last component is that when we teach children these emotional competencies, they will become more engaged academically, they will have healthier relationships, they will have more empathy towards one another, because they will build connections with one another and find out what they have in common. Because once they find out those commonalities, that's when they can have those friendships. That's when the stereotypes are decreased, and that's when empathy is increased, and the bullying will be decreased. So if we want to have resilient adults, then these are the 5 focus areas that we should really think about as we are addressing our children and our students.
Right. So going back just for a moment, and the research that followed on from a lot of this work, there was Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania has focused on how we explain the negative events we experience. So when something bad happens, we can relive that event over and over in our minds, keeping that pain, keeping those negative emotions fresh. Or we can acknowledge and explore the pain and still explore the upsides to the event. In other words, we can change the narrative. And it turns out that doing this and writing, when somebody, Robin, you mentioned before, and I think it came also in the chat, the power of expressive writing and examining, taking time to write through some of these experiences and exploring them can actually be a really important part of this, an important part of changing the narrative. There's something we can learn from almost every experience. Learning and personal growth are opportunities that are difficult to acquire when you're not challenged. If everything is easy and we're not being challenged and we're not finding things difficult, then we're probably not growing a lot. So there's sort of, it's an interesting balance between those two. And if we think about learning again as what happens at the outer edge of our current capacity, and we see negative or challenging experiences that take us into that zone so that we can grow, that's a really powerful way to change the narrative. And so another key part of this is not just what you can learn, but also focusing on what you can control. So this concept of examining the locus of control, where you perceive the control to be. So shifting from it's my fault to it's not all my fault, from the making it a focus on the uncontrollable and taking that to being a focus, an internal focus on what you can control, is another really important aspect of building resilience. Breaking a problem down into smaller, more manageable parts. I think we've all probably experienced, at least to some degree, that feeling of being completely overwhelmed by the COVID situation, all the different things and all the stuff that we were supposed to think about and do and whatever. You can't address it that way. But if we break it down, we take a little piece. Okay, how am I going to manage my grocery shopping? How I'm going to deal with the fact that I can't go get my hair cut? You can tell where my priorities are. But breaking it down into those manageable parts allow us to, eat the elephant one bite at a time, to use that expression. And then consciously developing flexibility, taking a lot of opportunities with our kids, with our students right now, to say, okay, faced with this, our inclination is to just solve the problem quickly, go and do something. But how can we think about this differently? How might different people attack this problem? How might different people feel about this situation? How would different people address it? And what options would they have? Finding multiple ways to deal with the situation. And all of these are skills that can be taught and practiced. And when you start to practice them, they become a lot easier. They may be a little bit hard at the beginning, but very much worth the effort to learn. So what we want to do now, and this comes again from Sanford Harmony, so I want Robin to take us through this, but here's a very specific way that we can take all of that stuff that we've been talking about, resilience, and translate it into a specific activity that's easy, and I think can be pretty fun to do at home or at school. And so I think this is one of the connection cards, if I'm not mistaken, Robin.
Yes.
It just lends itself really well to this type of conversation about changing the narrative. So, and getting the locus of control and the focus of control into a different place.
Such a great point. And this is one of the connection cards that you can find on Sanford Harmony. And I think now, just like you said, what can we control? And so let's focus on the positive. So you could do this, and feel free to put this in the chat if you feel comfortable, because you're being brave. You could be doing millions of things right now, and you chose to be on this call. So I consider that being brave, and you're resilient. You're surviving through COVID. So think of a time when you were brave. And if you don't want to put it in the chat, that is fine as well.
And I think when you do this, if you're doing this with kids, have them talk about that time. Talk about what skills did they use. So Robin often talks about superpowers. What were your superpowers that helped you overcome that situation and be brave in that situation? And then what did you learn? Again, going back to those the concepts about how we can really changing the narrative from being the victim to being brave, changing it from being what happens to me versus what I can learn about it and what I can control.
And that is great. And I see so many great answers in the chat. And there are various times when you were brave, whether it's being a single mother, moving to New York City at 22, your belief in God right now, doing a huge presentation in front of hundreds of CEOs, trying a new Zoom strategy, just trying something new, whatever it is, really focusing on the positive, because that is what builds that resilience. Because you remember, I went through this tough time. I was a single mother. I did this by myself. And those are the positive thoughts, and those are the attitudes that will link you to remembering that I got this. I can do this. I've done that. I've climbed a mountain before. I can get through COVID. I can finish homeschooling until end of June or whenever the school year is. We can make it through that. So,
right, and figuring out what you learned and what those skills were. So, I was a single parent also. I learned a tremendous amount of flexibility that I probably wouldn't have had. Might not be one of my, as strong a skill as I currently have it. And I think that if you go through each of these and talk about what you learned from it, what you got better at, the skills that really helped you get through that. That is so empowering because you still have those skills. You can bring them to the current situation. And I think then helping kids understand how they can apply those skills now. How could you take that same skill and use it?
Exactly. And thank you all for putting those comments in there, and just remembering that these social emotional competencies that we spoke about today, this is what will continue to build the resilience, and that you are doing all amazing work. And think of these times that made you who you are, and where you are today will give you the strength and resilience to make it through. And so as we wrap up today, let's review review our goals that we had. What did we accomplish today? So our first goal was to.
Oh, I thought rather than us reviewing it, that we would ask our attendees today, our participants today, to give a little thought to what they're taking away from it. We can summarize and we can say what we thought we did, but I thought if everybody could just, you don't have to do it in the chat. You may do it in the chat, but jot down one or two things that you're really taking away from our session today, because that's the most important, is when we reflect on our own learning and
Absolutely
elaborate on a little bit that's what helps us learn.
Thank you. And I see so many people have already put great things in the chat. So, identifying our emotions, and thank you for the kind words. Using the castle wheel.
And the mood meter.
The mood meter. Yep. Communication. Oh, I see a lot of the mood meters. That's great. Learn resources of Sanford Harmony. That's awesome. Better understanding what makes us resilient and adapting to the world around us.
Wow.
Excellent.
This is smart. This is a smart crowd.
That's a great group.
It really is. So rather than, we'll just leave this up. Everybody can reflect on how they're feeling now. And again, just because everybody seemed to value the mood meter. At the same time, let's just open it up and see. Feel free to type questions into the Q&A or into the chat window. Bruce Perry is great. His YouTube talks are wonderful. And he's a great resource as well. Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Wonderful.
Yeah, and you guys are really putting some nice things in the chat, and it's really been wonderful being with you today. Yes, and someone asked, will they get the link to this? Yes, we'll.
Yes, so it takes a little bit for the webinar to process, and everybody who's registered will get, I'm just putting a link again to the slides in case somebody missed it earlier, but you will automatically get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. So you will have that.
And there were so many wonderful questions in there in the chat. So if you did have questions that weren't answered, and Betsy or myself or any of the team members can help you, there's our contact information. So I definitely want to acknowledge the wonderful questions. So Betsy's contact is there.
Oh yeah, well here, I think everybody can read it. You got
Yep.
Both of our email addresses. Feel free to reach out. We'll put our heads together. We'll go over the questions and all that wonderful material in the chat window. And if we can do a little follow-up, we will. I know Robin and I have enjoyed working together. So
yes,
it'll be great to have another little project to do.
Absolutely. I would love it. And I just appreciate all of you. You have been such a wonderful and engaging and interactive team, and I'm very thankful. And if you have any questions, yes, Betsy and I will continue the conversation. So you'll get all this information sent to you in time. But if you have any specific questions about Sanford Harmony or social emotional learning or anything, my email is there as well. And I'll be glad to help you out in any way. If you want more resources or training on SEL or Sanford Harmony specifically, it is free. Like Betsy said, don't underscore that. Will always be free. So if there's anything, my contact is there. So we'd love to be able to revisit this. And just thank you all so much for all that you do and for your time and wonderful comments today. Very grateful for you.
Stay safe and well, and know that we will continue, the world's going to continue to change. We're not going back to how things were before. The new not normal is that nothing is normal, and it's constantly changing. So building these skills of resilience are more important than ever. All right, thank you so much. And Robin, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really a lot of fun and so informative.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day.
Take
Appreciate
care.
you all. Bye-bye.